The morning had passed, but the void left by Moses still lingered. Israel stood on the edge of the promised land, so close yet still separated by a river, a border, and a new chapter. The servant of the Lord, Moses, was dead, but God's promise was not. Now the mantle rested on Joshua, son of Nun, the warrior, the assistant, the man who had walked the wilderness with Moses, who had seen the cloud, who had lingered near the tent of meeting when others turned away. To him the Lord now spoke. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. The voice of God was steady, sovereign. He did not ask Joshua to lead alone. He promised, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. But there was a charge too, a fire in his command. Be strong and courageous. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Joshua did not hesitate. He gathered the officers of the people, the leaders of tribes, and gave orders. The time had come. In 3 days they would cross the Jordan. Every tent would be packed. Every tribe would rise. He summoned the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, the ones who had claimed land on the east side of the Jordan, and reminded them of their vow. Their warriors would go ahead of the others to help their brothers conquer the west. And they answered Joshua with unwavering resolve. All that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. But before the crossing there was one crucial task, one silent hidden step. From the camp Joshua secretly sent 2 men westward across the river. Go, view the land, especially Jericho. They moved swiftly and quietly under cover of dusk, crossing the waters and slipping into the fortified city of Jericho. Its walls loomed high, thick with age and pride. Inside, the streets wound tightly, crowded with merchants, watchmen, and eyes that noticed everything. The spies found shelter in an unlikely place, the house of a woman named Rahab, built into the city wall itself. She was known in the city, not for nobility, but for trade, yet beneath her roof, providence unfolded. Word of the foreign spies spread quickly. The king of Jericho sent messengers to Rahab's door. Bring out the men who have come to you, for they have come to search out all the land. But Rahab had already hidden them beneath bundles of flax on her rooftop. She told the king's messengers that the men had left just before the city gates closed, and urged them to pursue quickly toward the fords of the Jordan. The gate was shut behind them, and Rahab returned to the roof. In the darkness, among whispering winds and rustling flax, she confessed her fear and her faith. I know that the Lord has given you the land, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites. Terror had melted the hearts of Jericho's people, but Rahab stood with trembling faith. The Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. She made a plea, not for gold, not for favor, but for mercy. Swear to me by the Lord that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters. The spies promised. They gave her a sign, a scarlet cord, to hang from her window when Israel returned. If her family stayed inside, they would live. That night, under cover of darkness, Rahab let them down through her window by a rope. They fled into the hills and hid for 3 days while the searchers scoured the road east. When it was safe, they returned to Joshua and told all that had happened. Their report was not fearful, but filled with awe. Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. And so the time came. Joshua rose early in the morning. The people of Israel broke camp at Shittim and came to the edge of the Jordan. The river surged with the season's flood, swollen with springtime waters. Across it the promised land awaited. 3 days they waited. Then the officers moved through the camp with orders. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. But keep your distance, that you may know the way, for you have not passed this way before. Joshua turned to the people with solemn authority. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. The next day, as the morning light crept across the water's surface, the priests lifted the ark and stepped forward. The people followed at a distance, silent and watching. And when the feet of the priests touched the edge of the river, something ancient stirred. The waters stopped. Far upstream, the flow halted and stood in a heap. The current downstream ebbed away. Before Israel, the riverbed was revealed, dry, solid, wide. The priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant stood in the midst of the Jordan, unmoving, sacred, and all Israel passed over on dry ground. Every tribe, every family, every footfall a fulfillment of God's promise. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel. The people feared him as they had feared Moses, for they had seen the river part. This was no myth, no tale, it was the living hand of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, now moving forward with his people. The conquest had not yet begun, but the first miracle had spoken. God was with them, and Jericho was next. The waters of the Jordan still stood in awe, held back by the hand of the Almighty, and in the middle of the riverbed the Ark of the Covenant remained. Upon the shoulders of the priests the presence of God rested unmoved as the last of the nation crossed. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them. Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, and bring them over with you and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight." Joshua summoned the 12, one from each tribe, and they stepped into the dry bed beside the ark. With bare hands and reverent strength they lifted 12 stones, each a memorial, a testimony, and carried them to the shore. Then Joshua himself turned back. He walked to the very heart of the river and set up 12 more stones in the place where the priests still stood, a silent monument within the river's depth. When all was finished, Joshua commanded the priests to come up, and as their feet left the dry riverbed, the waters returned, rushing down from above, reclaiming the banks. The Jordan flowed again, but the memory would not be washed away. The people camped that night at a place called Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho. There the 12 stones were raised and set in place. And Joshua said to the people, "When your children ask in time to come, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord." The stones were not for that generation alone. They were a voice for generations yet unborn, a witness that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and that all the earth might fear him. As the news spread, the hearts of the kings of Canaan trembled. The Amorite kings to the west, the Canaanite kings along the coast, they heard what the Lord had done at the Jordan, and their courage melted. No spirit remained in them, but in Israel's camp God had unfinished work not of war, but of covenant. For all the men born during the 40 years in the wilderness, those who had not fallen in rebellion, had not yet been circumcised. The old generation was gone, and with them the signs of the covenant. Now, in the land of promise, the mark must be restored. And so Joshua obeyed. At the hill called Gibeath Haraloth, the knives were drawn, and the people waited until they healed. Then the Lord said, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." And the place was called Gilgal, rolling. From that day forward, the night before Passover came. On the plains of Jericho, under the stars of the promised land, Israel kept the feast. For the first time in decades, they ate the fruit of Canaan, unleavened cakes and parched grain from the land itself. And the manna ceased. The bread of heaven, which had fallen every day in the wilderness, fell no more. God had brought them home. The land would now feed them. Then Joshua lifted his eyes and saw a man standing before him, a warrior, a figure with drawn sword in hand. Joshua approached him and demanded, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" But the man answered, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped. "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander said, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." So Joshua obeyed. Jericho was shut tight, its gates closed, its walls unbreached. None entered, none went out. But the Lord had already declared its fate. "See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor." But the method would not be by sword or siege. The battle would not begin with assault, but with obedience. "You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat." So Joshua rose early the next morning. The priests took up the ark. Armed men marched ahead, and the rear guard followed behind. Priests with trumpets walked in solemn procession. Once around the city they marched, silent except for the soft tread of sandals and the quiet breath of anticipation. Not a word was spoken among the ranks. And then they returned to camp. For 6 days they did the same. Jericho's watchmen peered from their towers, puzzled and nervous. Each morning the strange procession circled them, and each night it vanished. No arrows, no siege engines, no war cries, just silent, circling faith. Then came the 7th day. At dawn the army rose early. The march began again, but this time they circled not once, but 7 times. Round and round they went, the trumpets sounding, the ark carried in reverent rhythm. As the 7th lap ended, Joshua raised his voice. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers." He commanded the people not to take anything devoted to destruction, lest wrath fall upon Israel. The trumpets blasted, the people shouted, and the walls fell, not one stone upon another. The mighty defenses of Jericho crumbled before the breath of heaven, and Israel charged forward. They devoted the city to destruction, all that was in it. Only Rahab and her family were spared. She and all who were in her house were brought out and placed outside the camp of Israel, just as the spies had sworn. Then the city was burned. The silver, gold, and vessels of bronze and iron were set apart for the treasury of the Lord. Everything else was ashes. Joshua pronounced a curse over the ruins. "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. What had begun with parted waters ended with fallen walls, not by might, not by power, but by faith and the word of the Lord. The land of promise had opened its gates, not through war, but through obedience. And Israel walked forward, one miracle at a time. The smoke of Jericho had scarcely faded, its ruins still warm from judgment, when Israel suffered a blow it did not expect. From among the ashes of victory, sin had quietly taken root. Unknown to the camp, one man had violated the covenant. One man had seen the forbidden things and taken them, silver, gold, and a fine Babylonian cloak. He buried them beneath his tent, thinking no one would know. But the Lord knew, and his anger burned. Joshua, unaware, looked to the next conquest. The city of Ai, a small stronghold near Beth Aven, was next in line. Spies were sent out, and they returned confident. "Do not make all the people go up," they said. "Let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not trouble all the people there, for they are few." It seemed easy. 3,000 warriors ascended toward Ai, but they were driven back, chased from the city gates, cut down along the descent. 36 men of Israel fell, and the hearts of the people melted like water. Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark of the Lord, his eyes to the earth, dust on his head. The elders joined him. All day they lay in silence and grief until evening. Then Joshua cried out, "Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to give us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan." But the voice of the Lord interrupted his mourning. "Get up! Why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant that I commanded them." The defeat was not a failure of strength. It was a fracture in the soul. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen and lied and put them among their own belongings. Until that sin was removed, the Lord would not go with them. So the people were summoned, tribe by tribe, clan by clan, household by household. The process was slow, reverent. The camp stood still under the weight of coming judgment. At last the lot fell on Achan son of Carmi, of the tribe of Judah. Joshua approached him gently, yet firmly. "My son, give glory to the Lord God of Israel, and give praise to him. And tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me." And Achan confessed, "Truly I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful cloak from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. And see, they are hidden in the earth inside my tent." Messengers ran to his tent. They found the treasures buried beneath his dwelling and laid them before the Lord. Then Joshua and all Israel took Achan, his sons and daughters, his oxen, donkeys, sheep, tent, and all that he had, and brought them to the valley of Achor. There Achan's sin was answered. He and his household were stoned, burned with fire, and covered with a great heap of stones. And the Lord's fierce anger turned away. The valley was named Achor, trouble, a reminder of the cost of hidden sin. Then the Lord spoke again to Joshua, not with rebuke, but restoration. "Do not fear and do not be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city and his land." But this time the Lord gave a new strategy. This time Israel was allowed to take spoil and livestock. So Joshua rose with the warriors of Israel and chose 30,000 mighty men of valor. By night he sent a portion to lie in ambush behind the city. He gave them strict instructions. "See, you shall lie in ambush against the city behind it. Do not go very far. Be ready." Joshua himself would lead another group toward the city gates, and when Ai came out to pursue them, they would draw the enemy away, then spring the trap. At dawn, Joshua and his men approached Ai. The king saw them and took the bait. The men of Ai rushed out to meet them, confident from their earlier victory. Joshua and his troops turned and fled, seemingly in retreat. Ai gave chase, drawn far from their gates. Then Joshua stretched out his hand and raised his javelin, the signal. The ambush rose like thunder from behind the hills. The hidden force rushed into Ai, found the city undefended, and set it ablaze. Smoke rose into the sky. The men of Ai turned back and saw their city burning. At the same moment, Joshua and his men stopped fleeing and turned. Caught between two forces, trapped, the men of Ai were struck down. None escaped. Israel captured the king and brought him alive to Joshua. As the smoke settled, the people gathered. They built an altar to the Lord God of Israel on Mount Ebal, just as Moses had commanded. There, On uncut stones they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. Joshua copied the law of Moses in full upon the stones in the presence of all Israel, and the entire assembly stood on both sides of the ark, half before Mount Gerizim, half before Mount Abel, just as Moses had instructed. Then Joshua read aloud all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, all that was written in the book. Not one word was missed. Men, women, children, and the sojourners who walked among them all listened. It was more than a military victory. It was a moment of restoration, a nation realigned under the voice of their God. Sin had nearly undone them. A hidden theft had brought defeat. But with repentance, with obedience, and with courage renewed, Israel had risen again. Ai had fallen. The land was beginning to open, and Israel now knew the battle was the Lord's. But the heart must remain true. The victories at Jericho and Ai sent a trembling through the land. Word spread swiftly across Canaan. The Israelites had crossed the Jordan on dry ground, brought down mighty Jericho without a siege, and crushed Ai with a divine ambush. From mountain to coast, the kings of the land stirred. Those in the hill country, the lowlands, and the great sea to the west, Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they all heard and they all feared, and so they gathered. Kings who once warred with one another now stood together, forming a mighty alliance to stop the advance of Israel. But not all chose war. Far to the west, in a city called Gibeon, the elders chose another path. Gibeon was a great city, strong and fortified. Yet the people trembled at the stories. They had heard of Egypt. They had heard of the Red Sea. They had heard of Jericho and Ai. They knew the God of Israel was not like other gods. So they devised a ruse. They gathered their delegation and set out, pretending to come from a distant land, far beyond the borders of Canaan. Dusty and ragged, they arrived in Israel's camp at Gilgal and presented themselves to Joshua. "We have come from a distant country," they said, "so now make a covenant with us." The leaders of Israel were cautious. "Perhaps you live among us. How then can we make a covenant with you?" But the Gibeonites insisted, "We are your servants. We have come because of the name of the Lord your God." They held out their moldy provisions and cracked wineskins. Joshua and the elders inspected their things. It all looked genuine. Their words were persuasive. But Israel made one grave mistake. They did not ask counsel from the Lord. And so Joshua made peace with them. He made a covenant to let them live. The leaders of the congregation swore an oath. 3 days later, the truth emerged. The strangers were not from far away. They were neighbors. Gibeon was close. Within the borders Israel was called to claim. The people grumbled. The covenant had been made under false pretenses. But an oath before the Lord could not be broken. So the elders of Israel declared, "We will let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." But they were made servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and the altar of the Lord. Joshua summoned them. "Why did you deceive us?" And they answered plainly, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded Moses to give you all the land. So we feared greatly for our lives." Joshua let them live, and from that day on they served at the altar of the Lord, a reminder that mercy could be found even through the ashes of deception. But the kings of Canaan were enraged. Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard what Gibeon had done. He summoned 4 other kings, Hoham of Hebron, Piram of Yarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Debir of Eglon. 5 kings, 5 cities, 1 alliance of fury. "Come up to me and help me, and let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel." The 5 kings rose up and marched on Gibeon, laying siege to it with intent to destroy. Gibeon sent a desperate message to Joshua, "Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites are gathered against us." Joshua did not hesitate. He went up from Gilgal with all the men of war, all the mighty warriors. That night the Lord spoke, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." Joshua and his army marched all night and came upon the enemy suddenly. The 5 kings were not prepared. Panic erupted in their ranks. Israel struck with fierce precision. The enemy scattered. As they fled, the Lord threw them into confusion. Down the slopes of Beth Horon they ran, but God was not finished. From the heavens, hailstones fell. Great stones of ice rained down from the sky, striking down the enemies of Israel. More died from the hail than from the swords of the soldiers. But the battle was not yet complete. As the sun dipped low, Joshua stood before the Lord and the army and cried out, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon." And the sun stood still. The moon stopped. Time itself bowed to the command of God's chosen. Never before and never after was there a day like it, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man fighting for his people from heaven and earth. The 5 kings fled to a cave at Makkedah. They were found and sealed inside with stones until the battle ended. Then Joshua returned. The kings were brought out, Adonizedek and the others. Joshua summoned his commanders. "Come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings." The commanders came, their feet pressing down on fallen power. Joshua said, "Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight." Then he struck the kings down, hanged them on trees until evening, and cast their bodies back into the cave, sealing the entrance with great stones. The campaign continued. Joshua struck Makkedah, then Libnah, then Lachish. Horam, king of Gezer, came to help and was defeated. Eglon fell next, then Hebron, and finally Debir. Every city, every king, all were devoted to destruction, and the Lord gave them into Israel's hand. Thus Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country, the Negev, the lowland and the slopes, with their kings. He left none remaining, but devoted all to destruction, just as the Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua returned to Gilgal, the camp where covenant began. It was a chapter marked by deception, justice, mercy, and miracles. A nation deceived, but not undone. An army outnumbered, yet not defeated. A sun frozen in the sky, and hail from heaven. 5 kings, fallen before the feet of God's people. And in it all, one truth rang clear. The Lord fought for Israel. The land shook under the weight of conquest. Cities had fallen, kings had bowed, from Jericho to Ai, from Gibeon to the southern highlands. Israel had moved like a tide driven by heaven's breath. Yet still the land was vast, the work incomplete. And now new voices of resistance began to rise, not from the south, but from the north. Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of Joshua's victories. Hazor was no minor town. It was the head of all those kingdoms, mighty and influential. And Jabin, determined to crush this rising force from the wilderness, sent messengers far and wide. He summoned Jobab, king of Madon, the kings of Shimron and Akshaph, the kings of the hill country, and those of the Arabah south of Kinnereth. He called the Canaanites in the east and west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Mount Hermon in the land of Mizpah. They came in waves. Their armies were as many as the sand on the seashore. Horses, chariots, soldiers, a vast horde stretching across the horizon like a thundercloud ready to burst. They camped together at the waters of Merom, united in one goal, to destroy Israel utterly. But the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." Joshua did not hesitate. He marched north, leading the warriors of Israel through the valleys and forests. At the waters of Merom, they fell upon the enemy suddenly. The massive alliance was thrown into confusion. The armies that had seemed unstoppable were scattered before the faith-fueled charge of Israel. Horses fled riderless, chariots shattered, the strength of man crumbled before the will of God. Joshua pursued them far, to Sidon, to Misrephoth-Maim, and eastward into the valley of Mizpeh. Not one enemy remained. Then, as God had commanded, Joshua crippled the enemy's horses so they would never again ride into battle, and burned their chariots in flames. Hazor, the crown of the northern coalition, was taken. Joshua struck down Jabin, its king, and destroyed the city with fire. It became a ruin, a memory scorched into the northern hills. The other cities of the coalition were also captured. Their kings were put to the sword. Their strongholds fell one after another. Yet not all cities were destroyed by fire. Only Hazor was burned. The rest were taken and left standing, becoming part of the land Israel would inherit. These battles were not of a single day. They stretched over time, season upon season, but Joshua pressed on, never turning aside. He struck down all who opposed him, kings and warriors, fortified cities, and hidden enclaves. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses, and the land was subdued. Among the conquered were giants. In the hill country of Hebron, in Debir, in Anab, there had dwelled the Anakim, men of great stature, remnants of a people who once terrified Israel. But now they were driven out. From the mountains of Judah and Israel they were purged. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did some remain. What once made Israel tremble now fell beneath their feet. Then the land had rest from war. But before the people could settle, before the tribes could plant or build, a record was kept, a scroll of remembrance etched with the names of those who had once ruled. These are the kings Israel defeated: Sihon, king of the Amorites, who ruled from Heshbon; Og, king of Bashan, of the remnant of the Rephaim. He ruled in Ashtaroth and Edrei. Moses had struck them down and given their lands to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. And these are the kings Joshua defeated beyond the Jordan on the western side: the king of Jericho, the king of Ai, near Bethel, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, the king of Eglon, the king of Gezer, the king of Debir, the king of Geder, the king of Hormah, the king of Arad, the king of Libnah, the king of Adullam, the king of Makkedah, the king of Bethel, the king of Tappuah, the king of Hepher, the king of Aphek, the king of Lasharon, the king of Madon, the king of Hazor, the king of Shimron Meron, the king of Akshaph, the king of Taanach, the king of Megiddo, the king of Kadesh, the king of Jokneam in Carmel, the king of Dor in Naphath Dor, the king of Goyim in Galilee, the king of Tirzah. 31 kings in all. Each name was more than a title. Each king had once ruled with pride, surrounded by walls and weapons, by chariots and gods of stone. But none stood against the God of Israel. Joshua had led them through fire and sword, but it was not his strength that conquered. Every victory had echoed the same truth: the land belonged to the Lord, and he had given it to his people. Now the wars were ending, but the journey was not yet complete. For the land must now be divided. The promise, long awaited, was ready to become reality. The sword had been drawn. The kings had fallen. From the southern plains to the northern peaks, Israel had marched and conquered. 31 kings had bowed beneath the weight of heaven's decree. But though the land now lay subdued, it was far from settled. Much remained. The Lord spoke once more to Joshua, his servant now aged, his beard silvered by time and battle. You are old and advanced in years, and there remains yet very much land to possess. The conquest had weakened Canaan's heart, but its fringes still stirred. territories by the sea, valleys shadowed by mountains, lands still held by strongholds and old enemies. From the land of the Philistines to the borders of Sidon and Lebanon, there was more to claim, but now conquest would give way to inheritance. The Lord commanded Joshua, "Divide this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes, and half the tribe of Manasseh. I myself will drive them out before the people of Israel." It was not unfinished work. It was a transition. Israel would settle, and the Lord would continue the victory. Before the western inheritance was divided, a remembrance was recorded. The eastern lands conquered under Moses, the territory east of the Jordan, stretching from the Arnon Gorge to Mount Hermon, had already been claimed by the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. This land had once belonged to 2 kings, Sihon of Heshbon and Og of Bashan. Their kingdoms had been destroyed in the wilderness days and now stood as a silent reminder of God's power before Jordan had even parted. Og's territory was vast. He alone had remained of the remnant of the Rephaim, giants of old. His bed, still remembered, was made of iron, over 13 feet long, a relic of defiance crushed by divine will. To the tribe of Reuben, the land was given from the Arnon Valley northward, with cities like Heshbon, Elealeh, and Kiriathaim, strongholds turned into pasture. To the tribe of Gad, the inheritance stretched from Jazer to Gilead, and across to the plains of Ammon, cities like Ramath and Mahanaim, where Jacob once wrestled with God. To the half-tribe of Manasseh, the northern reaches were granted, Bashan, the kingdom of Og, with fortified cities like Ashtaroth and Edrei. But in the midst of all these inheritances, one tribe received no portion of land, the tribe of Levi. To them no territory was given, for their inheritance was not in soil or city. It was the Lord himself. The fire of the altar, the tent of meeting, the holy work of worship, that was their domain. To the tribe of Levi alone Moses gave no inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord God of Israel are their inheritance, as he said to him. Now the time had come for the land west of the Jordan to be divided. But before lots were cast, one voice rose with a different claim, a voice aged but unshaken. Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He came before Joshua in Gilgal, his eyes still fierce, his step still strong. "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea concerning you and me." 45 years had passed since that day, when Caleb had stood among the 12 spies and alone with Joshua had brought back a faithful report. While others trembled, Caleb had believed. "I was 40 years old when Moses sent me, and I brought him word as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God." Because of that faith, Moses had sworn an oath that Caleb's feet would tread upon the land he had seen. Now at 85 years old, Caleb did not ask for ease or rest. "Give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said." Joshua looked at his old friend, brother in arms, fellow survivor of Egypt and the wilderness. He saw not age, but promise, and he blessed him. He gave Hebron to Caleb as an inheritance, the same land where the giants had once reigned, the same land where Abraham had once pitched his tents and buried Sarah in the caves of Machpelah. And Caleb drove out the Anakim. The giants fell before the faith of a man whose strength had not waned, not because of youth, but because of God. Thus the land had rest from war, not because every enemy had fallen, but because the Lord had declared the season had changed. The conquest gave way to inheritance, the sword gave way to settlement, and each tribe would now receive what had been promised. Since Abraham first stood under the stars and counted them, the story was shifting. But the covenant remained unbroken. God had been faithful to drive out nations greater and mightier than Israel. And now, with the land subdued, the promise stood firm. The land was not earned, it was given, each field, each hill, each city, granted by the hand of the Lord. And as the sun set over the quiet plains of Gilgal, the people prepared, not for battle, but for belonging. The wars had faded into memory, and the time of swords gave way to the season of inheritance. In the camp at Gilgal, scrolls were opened, boundaries were drawn, and the promise, once whispered to Abraham, was now measured with line and stone. It was not a kingdom built by conquest, but a homeland secured by covenant. And so the allotment began. The first to receive his portion was Judah, the largest tribe, and from whom kings would one day rise. Their territory stretched far and wide, southward from the border of Edom and the wilderness of Zin, all the way to the shores of the great sea. Cities, valleys, and mountains fell within their claim. Jerusalem, though not yet conquered, lay on the border between Judah and Benjamin. Among Judah's inheritance were fields where shepherds once roamed, where David would one day write psalms beneath the stars. But the allotment was more than land. It was also legacy, and one man's legacy echoed louder than the rest. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who had already been given the hill country of Hebron, now moved to claim it fully. Giants still walked there, the Anakim, remnants of the mighty race that once struck fear into Israel's heart. But Caleb, now 85, was not afraid. He rose and drove them out, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, giants who once made the hearts of men melt. Their strongholds fell before the strength of a faithful man and the God who walked with him. From Hebron, Caleb went to Debir, a city once called Kiriath Sepher. There he declared, "Whoever strikes Kiriath Sepher and captures it, to him I will give my daughter Aksah as wife." Othniel, Caleb's nephew, answered the call. He rose up and took the city, and won more than victory. He won the hand of a woman whose faith matched her father's. When Aksah came to her new husband, she urged him to ask for fields. But it was she who stepped forward. She came to Caleb herself and asked, "Give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negeb, give me also springs of water." And Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs, a gift of abundance in a land where water was life. Judah's boundaries were defined, city by city, region by region. Over 100 towns were counted, each named, each appointed. From the mountains to the foothills, from the wilderness to the coast, Judah's inheritance stood firm. Next came the descendants of Joseph, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Though sons of Egypt born Joseph, their portion was rich and central. The land of Ephraim was defined first, territory surrounded by Canaanite strongholds and fortified cities. Though much was granted to them, the full conquest was left unfinished. The Canaanites still dwelt among them in cities like Gezer. They were not driven out completely. Instead, they lived among Israel as forced labor, a compromise that would bear consequences in years to come. Then came the allotment for Manasseh, Joseph's firstborn. Yet even within Manasseh, division stirred. Machir, the warrior son of Manasseh, had taken Gilead and Bashan on the eastern side of the Jordan, and it became his inheritance. The remaining clans of Manasseh received land west of the Jordan. Yet within this tribe, something unexpected happened. A voice rose, not from a warrior, but from daughters. Zelophehad, a descendant of Manasseh, had died in the wilderness without sons. His 5 daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, came before Joshua and the leaders, just as they had once stood before Moses. They said, "The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our brothers." And Joshua did not hesitate. He gave them a portion among the relatives of their father. Thus the inheritance passed to women, not as an exception, but as a testimony that God's promise belonged to all who bore his name. But as the land was portioned, the voice of Joseph's house rose with discontent. The people of Ephraim and Manasseh came to Joshua with complaint. Why have you given us only one lot and one portion as an inheritance, although we are a numerous people, since the Lord has blessed us thus far? Joshua listened, then answered, If you are a numerous people, go up by yourselves to the forest and clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaim. But they pushed back. Joshua stood firm. You are numerous and very strong. You shall have not only one allotment, though the Canaanites have chariots of iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out. It was not land they lacked, it was courage, for God had given them more than boundaries. He had given them promise, but it must be claimed not with complaint, but with faith. The division of land was not just geography, it was the unfolding of divine purpose. Every field, a fulfillment, every border, a boundary of grace. Judah received the first share, anchored in heritage. Joseph's line received the central lands, seated in strength and size, and in between them the promise of God stood, not as a fence, but as a foundation. The promised land was not claimed in a day. It was drawn in steps, etched across scrolls and soil alike. But behind every marker, every river, every field, there beat the same heart of heaven. To your offspring I will give this land. The inheritance had begun, but many more were yet to receive their share. The land stretched out before them, valleys rich with promise, mountains wrapped in cloud, cities ancient and waiting. Yet still 7 tribes of Israel had not received their inheritance. The victories had been won, the borders were open, but the people hesitated. So Joshua called them together at Shiloh, where the tent of meeting was pitched, a symbol of God's presence now rooted in the heart of the land. And he spoke with the voice of a leader who had walked beside Moses, crossed rivers, and stood on battlefields. How long will you put off going in to take possession of the land, which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you? They had seen miracles. They had marched through parted waters and broken walls. But now that the promise lay before them, they grew still, not from fear, but from passivity. So Joshua gave them instruction. Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to survey the land and write a description of it, according to their inheritance. Then they shall return to me. And he would cast lots before the Lord in Shiloh. The men rose and went. They passed through hills and valleys, measuring cities and fields. They wrote it all down on scrolls, 7 portions drawn not from imagination, but from footsteps. And when they returned, they laid the scrolls before Joshua at Shiloh. The lots were cast in sacred ceremony. Before the presence of the Lord, tribe by tribe, the inheritance was declared. The tribe of Benjamin received the first portion. Nestled between Judah and Ephraim, their land held sacred history and future prophecy. Within their borders stood Jerusalem, not yet conquered, but destined to become the city of kings. Other cities lay within: Bethel, where Jacob dreamed of a ladder to heaven, and Gibeah, where future tragedy and judgment would stir. Benjamin's lot was small, but it stood at the crossroads of heaven's plan. The tribe of Simeon received land from within Judah's portion, for Judah's inheritance had proven too large, and from its abundance Simeon found a home. Their town spread across the Negev, dry lands watered by God's mercy. Cities like Beersheba, where Abraham once called on the name of the Lord, now rested in Simeon's care. It was not subtraction, but shared blessing. And in the quiet corners of Judah, Simeon would take root. Zebulun was next. Their land reached toward the sea and touched the edge of Galilee. Cities like Jokneam and Gath-Hepher would one day echo with the voices of prophets and messengers. Though small in size, Zebulun's territory stood as a gateway, where commerce flowed and caravans passed, and where prophecy would stir centuries later. Then came Issachar. Their inheritance was vast and fertile, a plain rich with harvest, fields stretching to Mount Tabor, where Deborah would one day rise and the Kishon River would run red with victory. Within Issachar's land lay Jezreel, a valley that would one day echo with battles and kings. Asher was given territory along the coast. From Carmel to Sidon, their land hugged the western edge, filled with strongholds and trade routes. Cities like Akko, Tyre, and Aphek stood within their reach. The sea winds brushed their fields. Their inheritance was distant from Shiloh, but not from God. Next came Naphtali. His portion rested in the north by the waters of Galilee and the heights of Mount Hermon. From Kadesh to Hazor, the tribe would dwell in a land of streams and stone. It was a territory destined to echo with footsteps of hope, for it would one day see the light of a Savior walking its shores. Finally, Dan received his lot. Their inheritance was along the coast, but trouble stirred within. The Amorites resisted. Cities like Ekron and Joppa stood with defiance. So Dan, restless and searching, looked northward. They rose and struck Leshem, a city far from their appointed land. They renamed it Dan after their forefather and claimed it as their own. It was a conquest driven not by divine command, but by desperation, a sign of the tension between promise and possession. Thus the land was divided by boundary, by tribe, by purpose. From the sea to the Jordan, from the mountains of Lebanon to the wilderness of Zin. Each tribe received what had been ordained, not by luck, not by ambition, but by the casting of lots before the Lord. It was not a map, it was a fulfillment. Each town, each river, each stone wall, every border carried the weight of covenant. Then came the final inheritance, not for a tribe, but for a man, Joshua, son of Nun. Though he led the nation, though he fought every battle and stood in the shadow of Moses, Joshua had claimed nothing for himself. But now the people of Israel came to him. They gave him the city he had chosen, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built the city and settled there. It was quiet, humble, far from thrones or monuments. Joshua, who once spied out the land, now rested within it. Not in grandeur, but in faithfulness. The division was complete. Scrolls were sealed, stones were set, cities were named. The inheritance of the people of Israel was established in the land of Canaan, just as the Lord had commanded through Moses. And there, in the sacred place of Shiloh before the tent of meeting, the book of the land was closed, but its words still echoed. The Lord is faithful to all his promises. As the tribes settled into their new homes, the land breathed a new rhythm. Fields were tilled, walls rebuilt, and families rooted in ancient soil. But amidst the peace, the Lord's law called for justice and mercy to walk hand in hand. So Joshua set apart a sacred provision, one woven into the heart of the covenant, the cities of refuge. In the days of Moses, the Lord had commanded, "Appoint cities of refuge, that the manslayer who kills a person unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood." Life sacred and precious demanded justice, but justice without mercy would turn the land into a place of fear. So 6 cities were established, 3 on the east side of the Jordan and 3 on the west. These cities stood like beacons, safe havens where the innocent could find shelter until trial, until judgment, until peace was declared. The cities chosen were no accident. On the east, Bezer in the wilderness of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead of Gad, and Golan in Bashan of Manasseh. On the west, Kadesh in Naphtali, Shechem in Ephraim, and Hebron in Judah. Each city was accessible, fortified, and known by all. Their gates opened wide, not for conquest, but for protection. The refuge was a reminder that even in a land won by sword and faith, the law of God remained supreme. The Lord's justice was measured, not swift vengeance, but careful judgment. The manslayer who fled was protected from the avenger of blood, the next of kin who might seek revenge. Only after the high priest died could the manslayer return safely to his home. Alongside the cities of refuge, another division was made. The tribe of Levi, set apart as priests and ministers, would not receive an inheritance of land like the others. Instead, the Levites were given 48 cities, scattered throughout all the tribal territories. Their inheritance was the service of the Lord, the care of the tabernacle, the teaching of the law, and the ministry of worship. These cities became centers of faith and law. In the hills of Judah, in the plains of Ephraim, and the valleys of Manasseh, the Levites lived among the people, teachers, judges, shepherds of the soul. Their presence was a constant reminder of God's holiness, mercy, and justice. Joshua gathered the leaders of Israel. These are the cities which you shall give to the Levites for an inheritance. And he named each city by tribe, fortresses, towns, and pastures, places for God's servants to dwell. The Levites, though landless, held a place of honor, for their portion was the Lord himself. Their sustenance came from the offerings of the people, and their lives were dedicated to God's presence. With cities of refuge and the Levites' portion established, the framework of society took shape. A land possessed by faith and sword, ruled by law and mercy. The promises of God were not just for land or victory. They were for justice, for protection, for worship. And the people of Israel now stood on holy ground, rooted in the covenant of law, guarded by the cities of refuge, and led by the tribes set apart. With the land of Canaan subdued and the tribes settled, a great moment of transition stirred amongst the people of Israel. The 2.5 tribes who had claimed the lands east of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, had fulfilled their vow. For many years they had stood as warriors beyond the Jordan, fighting alongside their brethren to claim the western lands. Now the time had come for them to return home. Joshua summoned these eastern tribes and spoke, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and you have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You have not forsaken your brethren these many days until now. The Lord your God has given rest to your brethren, as he promised. Now therefore, return to your tents and to the land of your possession." With hearts full and swords sheathed, the tribes prepared to journey home. But before they left, Joshua gave solemn charge. "Be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." The eastern tribes gathered at the Jordan, at the very place where the river bends and the sun shines on the hills. There, as a sign of unity and faith, they built a great altar of unhewn stones, stones taken directly from the Jordan where they had crossed. The altar was large and imposing, visible from both sides of the river. But when the western tribes saw this altar from across the Jordan, fear took hold. They wondered, had the eastern tribes forsaken the Lord? Had they built an altar for sacrifice, separate from the one in the land of promise? Rumors spread like wildfire. Joshua called the western tribes together. He said, "Give this message to the Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. You have not forsaken the Lord, nor have you rebelled against him by building an altar for burnt offerings, sacrifices, or peace offerings outside the Lord's sanctuary." And to resolve this crisis, Joshua sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, along with the leaders to confront the eastern tribes. They crossed the Jordan and approached the altar with heavy hearts. The eastern tribes stood ready. When the emissaries arrived, the Reubenites, Gadites, and Manasseh explained, "We did it not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, nor to make peace offerings. We built this altar as a witness between us and you. that the Lord is God. It is not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but a witness. If we fail to build this altar, then we would be guilty before the Lord. Hearing this, Phinehas and the leaders were filled with relief and joy. They blessed the people and praised the Lord for their faithfulness. The altar was not a rebellion, it was a reminder, a testimony that though separated by river and territory, the tribes remained united in worship and covenant. The altar stood as a witness across the waters. It bore the name Witness, a symbol that the tribes of Israel were one people, one family bound by the Lord. With peace restored, the eastern tribes returned to their homes. They lived in the lands promised to their fathers, serving the Lord faithfully. Their journey had come full circle, from wilderness wanderers to warriors now settled as heirs. The land was theirs, the covenant held, and Israel stood as a united nation ready to face the future. The years had passed swiftly, the battles had been fought, the land was divided, the tribes settled. Joshua, now an old man, stood before the leaders of Israel one final time. His voice was steady yet heavy with the weight of history. He summoned the elders, heads of families, judges, and officers to Shechem, a city rich with memories. Joshua began, "I am old and advanced in years. You have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you. The Lord your God has fought for you." He reminded them of the covenant, the promise made to their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. Do not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. Joshua warned them, if you turn away and cling to the remnant of these nations, and make marriages with them and associate with them, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you. He called the people to remember the Lord's faithfulness. Consider carefully all that I have commanded you. You shall not add to it or take from it. You shall cling to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. Joshua charged them, choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The leaders responded, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. We will serve the Lord our God and obey his voice. Joshua warned again, urging vigilance and faithfulness. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and do you harm and consume you. Before he departed, Joshua made a covenant with the people, setting a stone as a witness to their promise. A stone that would remain long after Joshua's death, a monument to commitment. Then Joshua blessed the people. He spoke of God's faithfulness, power, and promise, and the people rejoiced, reaffirming their loyalty. It was a moment of solemn farewell, the end of an era, but the covenant remained. The promise continued. Joshua's final words echoed through the generations. The Lord your God will drive out all these nations before you, and you shall possess their land. The Lord will give you rest from all your enemies. The land was secure, the people united, but the journey of faith was far from over. The sun hung low over the plains of Shechem, casting long shadows across the land where history had been written in blood and faith. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel, elders, heads, judges, and officers. They came not as divided clans, but as one people standing before the God who had brought them from slavery into freedom. The air was heavy with expectation. Joshua began to speak, his voice steady and commanding. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, and they served other gods. He recounted the journey of their fathers, how God had chosen Abraham, led his family to Canaan, and multiplied their descendants. He spoke of the sojourn in Egypt, the oppression, and the mighty hand of God that delivered them. And I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and led him through all the land of Canaan, and made his offspring many. Joshua reminded them of the times when God had protected and provided for them. I sent Moses and Aaron and Miriam before you. I brought your fathers out of Egypt. I led them through the wilderness to this place. He recounted the conquest of the land, how God had given them victory over kings and peoples. When they cried to the Lord, he put darkness between you and your enemies and made the sea engulf them. The memory of miracles hung in the air like incense. Then Joshua laid the challenge before them. Now fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. The people responded unanimously, Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Joshua declared, You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, We are witnesses. To seal the covenant, Joshua made a statute for the people. He set a stone under the oak near the sanctuary as a witness, so that it might remind future generations of the covenant. As the assembly dispersed, Joshua returned to his home. Years later, he died at the age of 110. He was buried in the land of his inheritance in Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. The people of Israel mourned him deeply, but they carried forward the covenant he had sealed. Though Joshua died, the story of God's people did not end there. Their journey was not over, and neither was the faithfulness of the God who started it all, with one man, one family, and one everlasting covenant. This is the end. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It helps share God's word with more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on powerful biblical teachings. Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless.